Welcome to another episode of Growth Hacker TV. I'm Bronson Taylor, and today I have Nick Loper with us. Nick, thanks for coming on the program.
What's happening, man? Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Look at you with your fancy microphone and everything. I love it.
It's like I'm a real life podcaster.
I know, right? This is what happens when I interview a real podcaster. They make me feel bad about my setup because my setup is jacked up.
Well, this is a good point to bring up because this is a probably a $70 mic now. It was probably $50 when I bought it, and so the podcast literally was my $100 startup. All the software, all the hardware was less than $100, and it's I haven't upgraded the mic since then. I did add this little mic boom arm thing versus the little tripod thing that sat on my desk, but that's what the side hustle is all about, right? Starting lean and going making do with what you can.
Absolutely. So you've already mentioned the phrase side hustle, and let me tell people, you are the guy behind Side Hustle Nation. It's a podcast, it's a blog, it's almost a movement. It's it's
That's
really,
very generous.
Yeah, and I think there is a movement around side hustle nowadays. But let's start there. What is a side hustle? How do you define it?
So a side hustle is something that you're doing outside of your day job to make extra money. And I think there might be a movement around there. And whether that's good or bad or indicative of our time. So I think there's an element of it that's proactive, which I would say is positive. Like people are seeing what is possible, what's out there. Like, hey, I can take control over my own financial destiny and I could start this business on a low risk way on the side. And that's awesome. And the other part of it is maybe less positive. I think that's kind of the reactive side of it. That's a response to the job market, job security. A lot of employers switching people to contracts versus full-time employment, and there's some flexibility and benefits that come along with that, but there's some drawbacks too, and so people are turning to their entrepreneurial roots, right? So I like to say, if you zoom out 200 years, like we were all entrepreneurs. A lot of us were farmers, but we kind of had to make our own way. And then there was Industrial Revolution, and we kind of traded that history of kind of being in charge of our own destiny in return for a 9-to-5 and a steady paycheck. And I think we're seeing kind of a return to that self-reliance in a little way.
Absolutely. So, you mentioned there's some positive reasons to do it, and there's also some negative reasons that people are doing it. They want the freedom, they want to escape, the cubicle, but there's also some freedom in terms of how they live their life. What do you think is better when somebody starts a side hustle because of positive reasons, or they start it because of negative reasons, the things they're trying to get away from or avoid? What's the better motivation? Is there one?
Well, I think both motivations can work, right? It's like burn the ships or, to make something, because you're going to be more hungry, right? Like if you need to make some money this month to pay for rent, like you're going to be more hungry and motivated to make that happen. But on the flip side, if you have a day job and you have kind of this silent partner in your employer to kind of bankroll your operations, you're allowed to be more strategic, you're allowed to do more speculative work, you're allowed to think kind of longer term. And for me, I would much rather be in that second position where it's like, hey, look, I have some time and I'm kind of using these extra hours to exercise my creativity, do something or scratch my own itch that my day job isn't allowing, versus coming at it from a standpoint of necessity.
Yeah, I've heard that it's generally good advice that when you're starting a side hustle or you're trying to start a new career, new business, whatever, not to quit your job and then just go all in on the new thing, but to kind of get there slowly, piece by piece, bit by bit, and ease your way into it, so you still have the security of the 401k and the salary until you realize there's a real hustle and a real bit of money to be made with the new thing. Do you agree with that, or do you like to burn the boats?
There are definitely people who are like, I couldn't take it anymore. I got to get out of this cubicle, and they're the people who are, I'm going to jump off the ledge and I'll figure out how to build my parachute on the way down. And that's not me, and that's not the kind of entrepreneurship that I want to advocate. With the side hustle stuff, it's start something small, start something low risk, build it up as you have time, and then you can make the leap in kind of one of two scenarios. The first is after you've built this up to something sustainable, where you're seeing some revenue history that's covering your expenses. The other scenario is like, okay, with an extra 40, 50 hours a week, I'm really confident I can get there. Like I've got a little bit of runway in the bank, and now I can kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel, and now's the time to make that move.
Yeah. Earlier you mentioned the $100 startup, and you said your $100 startup is your mic and that kind of stuff. Obviously, it's a book by Chris Guillebeau. Is that a book you recommend to people on your podcast and your blog? His way of thinking about things.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites, and it's one that's come up a few times actually from different guests and saying, hey, they were motivated after reading that. Combined with the 4-Hour Workweek is one I hear a lot.
Mm-hmm.
To try and start something small and start something on the side. One really cool story that came out of it recently was I connected with this woman through Help a Reporter. Actually, I was doing research for my book,
mm-hmm.
and I don't know if you get the Help a Reporter emails. Like I probably delete 9 out of 10 because it's just like I have 3 emails a day. I can't deal with this. But she happened to read this one. She said the same thing. She happened to read this one, and her business was like hosting urban hikes in San Francisco. And I was like, that's like an awesome side hustle. She used to work at Google, and now she's like, has this, or she works for like this copywriting agency.
Mm-hmm.
But this was her side hustle. And, she said, hey, it was after World Domination Summit. It was after reading the $100 Startup where I started to do this. And, she started, really small and, had some travel and deal site that kind of got her first customers, and then she encouraged everybody to leave TripAdvisor reviews, and all of a sudden it kind of starts spinning. And then she's like outsourced the hiking part of it to like people on her team, and now it's like this passive income business, and
mm-hmm.
she's got a whole book deal out of it. It was like kind of really cool to see the snowball of it.
Absolutely. And I think that's really the moment the magic happens, is when you decide to do something, right? You don't have to decide to build a large business. You have to decide to do something, and that seed can grow into who knows what, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Another one of my favorite interviews on the show is Ryan Finley. He runs a site called recraigslist.com, and he makes a full-time living just buying and selling stuff on Craigslist. Supports his family doing that. Has been doing it for years. And he told me, look, the best opportunities aren't visible until you're already in motion. And at the time, I thought that was kind of like a hippie thing to say. But, over the past few years, I've really recognized that to be true, because you may be working on a completely different project, and in the research for that, you notice something, and that sets you off down a different path, or you meet someone, and that conversation sparks another idea. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like that action breeds action, and it's really exciting to see where that may take you.
Yeah, I really like that quote. Say it one more time for us.
Which one? Action breeds action? Or
No, the one before that. The until you're in motion, you don't see the possibilities.
Yeah, what he told me, the best opportunities aren't visible until you're already in motion.
The best opportunities aren't visible until you're already in motion. I love that, because I've never heard it said so well, and I agree 100%. It's when you're in the arena fighting that you learn new moves, not when you're thinking about being in the arena,
Yeah, absolutely. Starting small. My friend Julie uses the analogy of it's like a game of chess. Entrepreneurship is like a game of chess. Like your first move doesn't really matter. You're gonna push a pawn like 1 square forward or 2 squares forward. I don't remember the chess rules. And people who play chess are like, it absolutely matters. But like her argument is like, look, you're just trying to get a reaction from your opponent. You just see what they're gonna do. Same thing in business, trying to get a reaction from your market. Hey, is there demand for this? And if not, well, you can adjust course from there.
Absolutely. So you have this podcast, you have this blog. You're always seeing people in their side hustle, seeing the things that work and don't work. So let me dig into some of the things that make a side hustle great. So what would you say are the essential ingredients in making a side hustle work? Are there any, or is everyone's recipe so different there are no common ingredients?
Let me think on the common ingredients. So one of the, I guess, overarching ingredients or themes would be, it's got to be something that you care about. Like that's kind of a prerequisite, because hey, you're already in my audience's case, like you're already working full time, you already have family obligations and whatever else. The last thing you need is a second job that you hate, right? So it's got to be something that you at least care about. You don't need, it doesn't need to be your like undying passion, but at least something that you're interested in, keep you motivated. Mm-hmm. Kind of the path that I often see is people getting started with freelancing or with one-on-one coaching, mm-hmm. Whether that's through an existing platform like Fiverr or Upwork, or whether that's through content marketing channels like your blog or podcast, mm-hmm. And then transitioning that from doing that part-time to doing that full-time. That's kind of the next step in the ladder.
Mm-hmm.
And where I see people taking that is going from one-to-one to one-to-many, whether that's with group programs or kind of paid membership groups or something like that. And then the next tier on the ladder is building some product or building some software, whether that's on the high end that can really go one to many, like this is the done for you course that walks you through 18 different video modules or whatever, or it's a software product that can be sold on a monthly subscription basis. I think CoSchedule is a really good example of that with Garrett Moon. And each step of the way, you're kind of removing more and more of your time from the process. You're kind of leveling up in that way.
Absolutely. Do people's first side hustle usually work, or is the first one just so ill-advised that it's almost impossible for that first step into the side hustle world to actually work?
Well, I think there are ways that you can make it work, and I think there's ways that you can lessen the sting of the failures, because the failures really are inevitable. I mean, the Side Hustle Nation, the whole project started as a side project for me when I was running my other business. My original side hustle was this like footwear comparison shopping site, and over the 10 years that I had that business, I started a dozen different projects, and almost all of those kind of ended up in the garbage heap of the internet. Like they never really did anything. And luckily, one of the ones that stuck around was this side hustle brand. To your point about like, is your first, are you like destined to fail, right? Or do you look at it as like, hey, each no gets me closer to a yes? And there's all sorts of like different sales mentalities. Like every failure gets me closer to that success. I don't know. I think failing still sucks no matter how you frame it, but trying to position it as an experiment might lessen that sting a little bit, where it's like, I'm going to give this a shot. If it works, great. If it doesn't, great. And especially if you're still the person who has that day job, has that paycheck coming in, you have a little more flexibility, a little bit more affordability to be able to do that. Where I think the opportunity or the strategy comes in to maybe reduce your risk of failure is starting, stupidly small. True, because if you don't have any cost, like that's not really, what did you lose? You lost, some of your time. One of the methods that I'll advocate for is, I'll call it the buy button strategy, which is basically to take advantage of kind of all the pre-existing marketplaces that are out there. The ones we talk a lot about on the show are Amazon and eBay and Craigslist and Udemy and even iTunes in the case of podcasts. With the gal who was leading the hikes, she took advantage of the TripAdvisor platform. But basically it's like, look, hey, go where the cash is already flowing. Like there's already this huge audience of buyers that some other company has already built, and they make it really easy for you to stick your buy button up on their platform. Airbnb is a perfect example of that too. Right? Imagine 15, 20 years ago, like if you wanted to rent out the spare bedroom in your house, like you'd probably be limited to, a sign in the front yard or an ad in the newspaper or something like classifieds. But now they've built this huge marketplace with demand, and it's pretty easy to get started on those.
Yeah. So let's try to help people here, because, obviously the more you do, the more you learn, and there's a better chance of success the longer you're at it. What are some of the pitfalls that you see people make early on, that if you could just tell them, hey, don't do this, it's not going to end well? What's the things that help them fail less early on with their side hustle?
Gosh, there are tons of these, right? So like investing a ton of money. Investing a ton of money in a website, convincing yourself that you need a logo and business cards and all this collateral, convincing yourself you need to like register a business or an LLC, and like spending all this time and money doing that, where if that, the exception to that would be like, if that gives you the confidence to go out and get a customer, by all means, like, if you need to check that off your mental checklist first, like, okay, go ahead. But I think your time is probably better spent like validating your idea, going out and seeing if somebody wants to pay you for product XYZ. Like I met somebody at an affiliate conference, probably 10 years ago, a long time ago, and they were like, well, I don't have my site isn't up yet, but it's almost done. And it kind of struck me as weird because it's like, well, your website is never really done. It's kind of a evolving thing. It's like a living, breathing thing. And I thought that was a weird way to frame it. So doing that, putting all your eggs in one basket before you have any kind of validation. What else is kind of common failures? That's, we talked a little bit about it, but just like dumping too much money into something before you have proof of concept. So in the shoe business example that I was running for years, so I started out with direct text link ads on Google, and I would link them up using my affiliate link to specific products. Be like, hey, if you're searching for this specific model of shoe, I think this store has the best deal, text ad, affiliate link, a budget of $1 a day, because I was still in college. And that's how it got started. Like in Good to Great, Jim Collins talks about, firing bullets before cannonballs, or great by choice. I can't remember which one. And so those little text ads were the bullets. And then, once I had some proof of concept, some validation, people were actually clicking the links and buying them and they were profitable. That's when I plunked down and invested in getting, hiring a developer, building this whole database and building out the website. And that was like, okay, now that I've kind of calibrated, this is going to be the cannonball.
Yeah. It's almost like the bullets before cannonball is very much Eric Ries, build, measure, learn. Don't have all this unnecessary waste in development or anything else. Really know what's going to work to some degree before you double down on it. It just seems so logical, and yet you're right. We overlook it all the time. We want to invest way too much money, way too much time. We want to throw cannonballs on day one instead of really, build, measure, and learning. So what would you say in all the stories you've heard of side hustles? Give me some of the ones that are either exciting or memorable or super weird. Like, what are some of the side hustles you've come across that you just, you think about them?
Yeah, so we talked about the Craigslist guy. I love that story. We talked about the urban hikes. I love that story. One of the other ones that kind of sticks out in my mind is this guy actually not too far from you. He's kind of in Central Florida. He calls himself the flea market flipper, where it's just the age-old business model of buy low, sell high, right? So every weekend he's out at the flea market trying to find, in his words, the odd items and seeing if there's a mismatch between what it is locally and what he thinks he can get it for or get for it online. So we gave the example of selling, like finding a prosthetic leg for $30 or $40 and flipping it on eBay for $1,000, or like some weird, exercise bike that was used like in physical therapy offices for a few $100 and turning around and selling it for $2,000. And, so that's something like anybody can do. Like if you have a smartphone, you kind of have an eye for picking this stuff out, you could do that. One of the very early episodes of the Side Hustle Show, one of the episodes that I think kind of put the show on the map, was this gentleman whose claim to fame was earning enough money on Fiverr to buy a house after his first year on the platform. And I was like, hold on. So I've used Fiverr as a buyer at this point for the past couple of years. Like, never even given a second thought to selling on there. Like, what could you possibly sell for $5 that would be worthwhile? And so he came on, like, similar to a lot of these other platforms. Like, it's all about that leveling up. And so as you make more sales, you can add different and larger upsells. He made a point to say, look, it's the marketplace of goods and services where everything starts at $5. Starts at is the key. And so the way he had it set up was all the $5 things were pre-written PDF files, audio files, video, some asset that he'd already created that he could fire off in 2 seconds. And then if you wanted his direct time, you could pay for that in the upsells or in the extras. And I thought he had it set up in a pretty smart way. I think one of his, he had a PR background and kind of a copywriting background. So it was like, I'll send you the 7 steps to a killer autoresponder sequence or something, would be the $5 thing. And then in the upsells, like, I'll write message number 1 for you, I'll write message number 2 for you. And Fiverr, because they take a cut of every sale, they've kind of stepped up their game as well, and kind of encouraging and incentivizing people to make bigger sales. So now you can quote custom packages up to $10,000 on Fiverr now, and it's just, hey, they're happy to run it through their platform and take a cut.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Nick, this has been awesome kind of hearing about the ins and outs of side hustles, some of the memorable ones, some of the things to not do, and just all of those things. So these are 2 questions I end every interview with. So first, what are you doing as soon as this interview is over? Whether it's awesome or super boring, what is it?
I'm finishing editing next week's show.
Awesome. And then last question, what's the best advice you have for any startup that's trying to grow?
I don't know. It depends. It depends on the startup. So
let me ask a version for you. What's the best advice you have for anyone that's trying to grow a side hustle? They have a side hustle, it's working, they want to grow it.
Okay, so look at the 80-20, right? Like you have some clients at this point. That's fantastic. Some revenue is coming in. Do your analysis of, what is the 20% of effort that's leading to 80% of the results. Mm-hmm. So when I did this last year, I kind of ran a survey kind of to the same effect. I found out that the podcast channel was far more effective for me than the blog channel, right? Mm-hmm. So what I did in response to that was like, well, I could just safely cut back my writing time every month, because it's really time consuming to put together a big post. And if only 1,000 people are going to read it, versus I can put that same effort into producing a show where 10,000 people are going to listen to it, like it's a no-brainer. So you kind of can double down on what's working in that way. And did the same thing in the shoe business, where it's like, okay, we have 4,000 ads and 100 and something different brands to maintain it all the time. Maybe the top 30% of those are really what's driving the majority of sales, yet everything else is what's time consuming to maintain. So how can we get smarter about that?
I think that's great advice to end on. Nick, thank you so much for coming on Growth Hacker TV.